Not My First Language, a memoir. Written and read by Reena Arora-Sánchez. For my loving parents, Dr. Deepak and Michelle Arora, who showed me how to be a citizen of the world. And for my ancestors, who made sacrifices I'll never understand to give me choices they never had. One. A feeling of finality hung in the air, only palpable to those connected to her in the most intimate of ways. Dad was restless in the chair he'd placed next to Mom's bed, silently processing the demise of his life partner. This was his wife, our mother, the family unit's collective rock. Weeks after her neurologist confirmed her prognosis, Mom's 8-year battle with brain cancer was ending, and we had no choice but to come to grips with the inevitable. Dad turned to my brother and me with an expression I'd never seen on his face before: desperation. As a physician, he'd experienced the worst of life circumstances: bullet wounds in Brooklyn, miscarriages in Millersburg, cardiovascular issues in Cleveland. He was accustomed to navigating chaos and solving everyone's problems. He thrived in that mode, really. But in the case that mattered most, there was nothing more he could do. Nothing in his decades of medical experience that prepared him for the loss of his wife. At some point, he realized that the only thing he or any of us could do was try to make her as comfortable as possible as she withered away in someone else's bed. "Can you put on some 60s music or something?" Dad pleaded, his normally commanding voice now small and shaking. I knew what he meant by 60s music, specifically the British invasion. I ignored the fact that he'd never cared for that genre and mindlessly got up from the armchair across from my mother's bed to oblige. As I shuffled through my phone's music library, the familiar harmonies of the Beatles filled the room like angels. My mother had loved the Fab Four from the moment they touched down on U.S. soil, just miles from her childhood home, months after her 6th birthday. Her obsession trickled down to the rest of us. I listened to them more than whatever made the charts in the mid to late 90s, until another band full of heartthrobs stole my attention. Most days I could hear the Beatles echoing from Mom's bathroom radio during her morning routine, in the car while I served as her helper running errands needed to maintain a 6-person household, and during all those chemo and radiation treatments. Mom would often ask the MRI technician to, quote, "put on Paulie," to combat her claustrophobia in the machine where she would spend far more of her life than she imagined. It was only fitting that John, Paul, George, and Ringo joined us now. I adjusted the volume on my cell phone ever so slightly, hoping the melodies of her youth, and mine, would bring my mother peace. Dad, Steve, and I silently observed her breathing become heavier and heavier, the gurgling sound in her throat more audible as her lungs struggled to fulfill the most basic of bodily functions. Her specialist at the Cleveland Clinic, the one who no doubt kept her alive years and years beyond her initial prognosis, assured us she wasn't in pain, that it sounded far more uncomfortable than it was for her. By that point, she was beyond feeling, beyond sensation, beyond recognition. She was simply a vessel waiting to be called to that place in which she and every other devout Catholic prayed they'd earned a spot. I watched my parents together for the last time. I knew their relationship had been unconventional, but I never fully appreciated how many barriers they'd faced as a mixed race, mixed culture, mixed religious couple who met in 1970s New York City and somehow found themselves on 50 acres of land in rural Ohio. The youngest of 5 boys from a poor New Delhi family seeking the American dream found his ideal mate, a self-identified girl from Queens who throughout her youth meticulously plotted a life beyond her blue-collar roots. To outsiders, they had far more differences than commonalities, but their shared values and dreams outweighed any superficial contrasts. I wondered what would have happened if fate hadn't intervened in that Brooklyn hospital. What if Mom hadn't been more open-minded than her first-generation parents who were conditioned to assimilate? What if the woman Dad had initially wanted to marry hadn't been scared off by Grandma Aurora? What if my mom had become a writer instead of a nurse? Would my parents have gotten together? Would Mom have grown a brain tumor so malignant that not even the most powerful health system in the world could beat it? Would Dad have found himself on the edge of retirement, alone? Would I be here to tell this story? Dad kissed Mom's forehead, cried, and told her not to be scared. For nearly 8 years, he did everything humanly possible to keep her alive. Yet no amount of money or medical expertise could change the universe's plan. For the first time in his life, the man who insisted anything was possible if you worked hard enough for it couldn't influence the outcome. He had no choice but to allow the brain tumor to run its course. I think this is it. His voice trailed off as he turned to Steve and me. After 4 decades with my mom, Dad's intuition told him what was coming next. My brother and I took our respective places as I anxiously held Mom's limp left hand. My heart broke knowing that she couldn't squeeze mine back. Steve's slender 6-foot frame towered over the bed as he placed his hands in his pockets, somberly taking everything in. Dad remained on my mother's right. Her breathing began to slow, the gurgling noises cutting the air. Barely a minute had passed since Dad's pronouncement, and it was over. The Michelle Aurora we knew, wife, mother, sister, daughter, and friend, was gone, off to the stars to join those waiting for her on the other side. I reached for my phone to call my sisters. Dad didn't have to ask. Not My First Language is a personal memoir. It is based on my own recollections, perspectives, and interpretations of events during a specific period of my life. These accounts are presented as I remember them, but memory is inherently imperfect, and others might recall these events differently. This creative work of self-expression represents my recollection alone. For clarity and to protect privacy, certain names, identifying details, events, timelines, and circumstances have been altered, condensed, or omitted. Portions of dialogue have been reconstructed or adapted to convey the substance and essence of remembered conversations. This book is not intended as a factual record. Any resemblance to persons living or deceased, or to actual events or circumstances beyond those drawn from my own experiences, is entirely coincidental.